This is the Skirt Emporium by Madame Zsazsa, published by Search Press. Now before I show you inside the book, let me just show you the skirt that I've made from the book. There's 25 different styles, but I've chosen this one because I like the tailored look. Really simple to make. You've got full-size patterns in the book as well. There's dots at the front of this one. It's faced on the inside, but I'm going to show you in this video how you're going to make the skirt, but particularly how you're going to fit the invisible zip, because I think this is quite impressive and it's ever so easy to do. On the inside you can see the facings finish off the skirt really well, and the hem, you'll see this later on, is all finished with bias binding. So that's coming up in a bit. Let's take a look through the book itself. Madame Zsazsa starts off by introducing you to the book. There she is, look. It's such a fun book. It's all based around a circus. But she's going to take you through everything that you need. So if you're brand new to sewing, all you need to be able to do is to use your sewing machine and work out a a half inch or a 1 centimetre seam allowance. She'll take you through basic sewing and even how to make some pattern weights. So even if you're brand new to sewing, you've got a little project that you can start on there before you even start thinking about making your skirt. So here are all your measurements, and these are from children from 2 years old. So it's not just for you, it's for the kids as well. All the way through trimmings, different types of fabrics, different types of zips, how to transfer your pattern, because as I said, there were full-size patterns. You will need to put them onto pattern paper before you cut them out. And then all of your different basic pattern sections, the tools that you need, your cutting tools, your sewing essentials, and then we'll take you through onto those 25 projects. Now we've got skirts for all occasions. You've got elasticated waist, fitted waist, skirts with piping, skirts for the kids and skirts for the grown-ups, and there's even a maternity skirt in here as well. You're also working with different types of fabric. So I use denim for my skirt, but there is a section on skirts with elasticated fabric like jerseys as well. That's an A-line skirt with piping. Love the hand-drawn look as well. It really makes a very personal feel to the whole book. Jersey with waistbands. There's the maternity skirt I was mentioned earlier on. And again, very simple step-by-step instructions. So I think she's done a really good job here because of the variety of different skirts that you're going to be able to make, whether it's something for casual wear, something for a more formal occasion. And of course you can, oh, there's my skirt, that's the straight one that I made. But you can adjust these to make a perfect fit as well. So you can have a perfectly tailored fit. That was a full circle skirt. And of course you've got the length that you want by using your own measurements as well. So skirts for all occasions, and skirts for all of the girls in your family, from the little ones all the way through to the grown-up ones. 25 of those in total, and you've got to remember those full-size patterns in the back of the book as well. So I hope you enjoy making your skirts as much as I enjoyed making mine. And here's how I made mine. So the idea with the patterns is that you're going to transfer those patterns onto paper, which I've already done. I've already cut out my pattern pieces. And what I like to do with the individual pattern pieces, like this is the facing from my skirt, is to keep the pattern pieces pinned to the pattern so that I can identify which pieces they actually are. Now with the facings, which are these two, I've got one for the front and one for the back. And I've already put the interfacing, which is an iron-on interfacing, onto the wrong side, and then I've done the zigzag stitch as instructed in the book, and this helps to stop the fabric from fraying. I think if you've got an overlocker or a serger, you could finish off with that as well, maybe a little bit quicker. Okay, so let's put those to one side for the moment and take a look at the skirt pieces. So this is the front of my skirt, and that's the back of my skirt. Now do measure yourself first of all, and if it helps, you can always make up a toile or make up the skirt in a cheaper fabric first of all. For instance, I've realised that I don't need 4 darts in the back of the skirt as is on the pattern, because I don't have that much difference of a shape between my waist and my hips, so I don't need the hips to go out that much. So I've changed that to 2 darts on my pattern. And then this is the front of my skirt, which has 2 darts in here as well. I've actually drawn on the V shape of the dart so you can see exactly where I'm sewing, and then there's a little mark on the side there, which is where the zip is going to be inserted. So I've already put my darts into the back, so let's put the darts into the front. Now with the dart, the trick is to fold this over so that you've got a perfectly symmetrical dot going down to the point, and I'll just add a pin in here. It's recommended in the book that you make little holes through your paper pattern and into the fabric. Because I'm using denim, it's a little bit heavier, so you probably wouldn't see the holes. And then as you start to sew, let's just take the ends of my thread away. Introduce a very gentle curve into the shape of the dart. So instead of going straight down like this, I'm going to go very slightly curved so that I don't end up with so much of a point at the end of the dart here. So very gently off to the end of the point. Snip your threads. Take the two ends of that thread and tie it into a knot so that's not going to come undone. Like so. And snip. And then we'll do the same with the opposite dart here. So there's my dart. Fold in half, make sure that those markings meet. And there's a pin. And again, sew round in that very gentle curve. Off at the point. Out comes the pin. And tie. Oh, come here. There we go, and snip that off. And I'll press that in just a second. Then we're going to sew two pieces of fabric right sides together. So again, there's the front. And here's the back. Now if I just fold this over so that the front side is facing me, I'm going to sew down the left-hand side of the skirt. And that's using a 1 centimetre or a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So pin all the way down first. Again, matching up any markings that you may have on the pattern that you're using. It's recommended with a straight skirt as well that you measure your hips. The other skirts in the book they've got gathered waists, or they're very flared or elasticated waists, so it doesn't really matter too much about the hip measurements. But because this one's fitted, because obviously it's a straight skirt, then it's recommended that you measure the hips as well, just to make sure you get that perfect fit. Right, so that's the front piece on the top of the back piece, sew down the left-hand side. Then I'll need to do the same with the facings, but the other way around. So with this one, the front piece goes down first, the back piece goes on top, and we're just going to sew along that one side, again with the 1/2 inch seam allowance or 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now when I've sewn these two pieces together, I'm going to again sew a zigzag stitch all the way down the edge. I'm going to trim away all of these little bits that are fraying, then give it a press. Then we'll come to sew in the invisible zip. I'm just taking out my pins as I sew. It explains to you in the book as well about your seam allowance. Most sewing machines will have a throat plate with markings on it, and that'll have a 1 centimetre or your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So all you do is to guide the edge of your fabric up against that mark, which is something that, you know, if you're a beginner sewer, that you may not realise that that's what it's for. And then open out the seam, go to a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, and sew the edge. So that's that seam all neatly finished off. So the next, and I've done the facing as well, and that's finished off and pressed. So we'll put that to one side, we don't need that at the moment. The next thing we're going to do is to fit the invisible zip. So that's how my skirt's looking at the moment. That's the back. The back's got a little bit more of a curve on the waistband, so you can tell which side's which. So my invisible zip needs to go down this side here. So we'll do this one side at a time. An invisible zip sewn before the actual seam is sewn in. This is what an invisible zip looks like, and I'm using red purely so that you can see where I'm sewing it, but hopefully you won't be able to see that. It's a bit of a challenge to my zip fitting skills. All you should be able to see of the zip when it's finished is that pear drop shaped little tag there. So all of this should be inside the seam. And this is your invisible zipper foot. Now they look slightly different depending on what kind of machine you've got, but most of them look pretty much like this, and it's got two little grooves on either side, and these are what are going to sit behind the teeth of the zip. If I just open this up, and they open up the zip as they're sewing. So your stitch line should be right in between that little fold there, so that when the teeth curl back around again, then they can seal. That's what makes it invisible. So your stitch line should actually be practically on the seam of your skirt. You can help this a little bit if you wish by putting a cool iron over the zip and opening it up, or you could just finger crease that open, and that kind of helps a little bit. Okay, I'll pop that on the machine in just a second, but back to my pattern. So take the skirt fabric with the fabric facing the right side up, and your zip facing slider side down. On the instructions it'll say to mark 1 centimetre from the top of the waistband, and that's you're going to start sewing with the stopper of the zip just below that 1 centimetre mark. As it happens, the tape above my stopper is 1 centimetre, so I don't need to mark like that. So I'll pin this in place, and she recommends that you start sewing from the bottom of the zip upwards. So I just need to pin this where the bottom's going to actually be. So undo the zip all the way down. That's where the bottom of my zip is going to be. Okay, let's bring in the machine. And I'll put the zipper foot on. You can sew with a regular zipper foot, but if you're going to do a few of these, it is worth investing in a proper invisible zipper foot. It just makes it that little bit quicker. All right, so you'll never get right down to the end of the zip with a concealed zip, but try and get as close as you possibly can. I just need to move my needle over slightly so that, oh no, there we go, I'll be fine. Again, so that that stitch line goes right underneath the teeth of my zip. And then as you start to sew, there's a little point on the middle of the zip here that pushes the teeth away from the stitch line. I think I can take those pins out now. So now I can take my pin out of the bottom. Let me just snip away these threads. So now when I fold the zip back, all I see there are the teeth. So when I close the zip, you can see how they've completely disappeared. So that's working really well. So let's do the opposite side. Undo the zip again. And round to the right side, and we'll pin this facing in the opposite direction. So that flips over there, and this one flips over here. And just like with the other side, I'm going to pin this and start at the bottom. So some of your invisible zipper feet, you can kind of move them across because the needle needs to go to the other side. Sometimes you'll need to move your needle. But let's see how we go. So that goes under there like that. And there's where my end of the zip is going to go. Can feel a little bit fiddly, but all I'm concentrating on here is this end, not what's going on here, but this side of the zip. Oops. Right, and then we'll sew. Take my pin out, and just before I start to sew the whole thing together, or the seams together, I'm just going to make sure the zip works. And that's perfect. I don't see the zip teeth at all. I just see that little pull, or the zip pull, or the slider from the top. The top of the waistband here, where there's that 1 centimetre gap, is where the facing is going to be sewn on. So when that folds over with the facing, my zip will come straight to the top. And then with the bottom of the seam here, we'll need to turn the skirt inside out, put my regular sewing machine foot back onto my machine, and then we can sew up the side seam. So as you line up the edges of the skirt here, push this out of the way, and you can see the seam where I finished sewing the zip in. That's where I'm going to start and carry on sewing all the way down the side of the skirt. Would be a good idea, I think, at this point as well, before you put the final seam in there, just to try the skirt on again. Just to make sure that it fits, because at this point you can make any tweaks if you needed to make the darts a little bit smaller, or let the side seams out, or add extra darts. So do that as you go, rather than all in one go when the skirt's been finished, because we want to prevent any kind of unpicking. Right, you may find it easier to put the zipper foot back onto your sewing machine, or you may have a sewing machine where you can move the needle over, as I do on here, just so that you can catch the very end of that stitch line that you've just made. Oops, which is there. And then sew. So let's have one final check that everything's fine. And then when I'm happy, I'll try it on quickly, then I'm going to zigzag over the edges, the raw edges, so that's going to make it nice and neat. But here we go. Let's see how well I've put that zip in. I think that's a pretty invisible zip. Let's see if it works. There you go. So that's where the bottom of my zip finished, that's where my seam started, and when I pull the zip together, all you see is the seam. So I'll go and finish off those edges, give it a press, then we'll get on to putting the facing on. So let's put the facing around the waistband. I've pressed open the seams, I've finished off with a zigzag stitch, so we're looking nice and neat on the inside. And we need to put the facing right sides together with the skirt. So I find it easier to do it by popping the facing inside. So open out the zip section so that the edge, the one that I've just zigzagged, is facing outwards. Don't sew your facing in with the zip folded back, you need to have that open outwards. And then we'll just put the edges together here and pin. And we'll pin all the way around, making sure that when I get to the next seam, the side seam here, that matches up with the seam of my facing. It's quite a quick skirt, this one actually. And it's so simple to make as well. And quite forgiving. I thought I'd make it in denim because I wanted this to be just quite a casual look. But it would look really nice if it was in something like tweed or something really smart as well. I just think this style lends itself to that. So you could easily wear it in denim with a white shirt or a t-shirt for a very smart casual look. Or this could be the sort of skirt that you team up with a very smart blouse if you're going to wear it to the office or a smarter occasion. So it's really versatile. Okay, so that's all pinned in. So I'll just start sewing here and show you what I'm doing. Bring in the machine. So I'll put the regular foot back onto my sewing machine again. And we're going to sew down the side first of all. So obviously not on top of my zip, but just on the inside here. So all the way down. So I'm actually sewing onto the zip tape and onto the facing. And then I'll just show you this corner to show you how it works, and then I'll carry on sewing. So now I'll go back to my 1 centimetre or ½ an inch seam allowance, and we'll start to sew. Now obviously you'll carry on all the way around. I just wanted to show you how this is working because this looks really good. So you'll cut off the corner here, and then when you turn the facing over, and you'll need something sharp but not too pointy, she says. That pushes out the corner there. And then from the outside of your skirt, this will all be top stitched as well. Look how neat that is. So then when the zip's done up, your teeth will disappear and all you're going to see is that little red droplet from the top of the zip. Okay, so I'll carry on sewing around the top there, and then just to finish this off and keep it all sitting neatly, I'll put a top stitch all the way around the edge of the waistband. Now press my skirt, I think it's looking really smart, and it was only when I pressed it and I was going to top stitch around the top, I actually decided that that looks really neat without any kind of stop stitching. It's all held in place with the facing at the side of the zip, so you can see where that's really neat on the inside there. So all I need to do, I think, is to put a little hand stitch on the seam of the facing and the outside of the skirt just to hold that in place. So I don't think I need it. So this is where the zip is again. Now it's all nicely finished. So there's my invisible zip. And again, that's the facing as it meets the inside. So that looks really nice and neat from both the front and the back. So now it's time to hem. There's two ways of hemming the skirt. You can either use bias binding or you can fold over the hem twice, but it is important at this stage now to try the skirt on and just make sure that you've got it to the exact length that you want it to be. So I'm going to use bias binding. I'm using red just because it picks up on the colour of the zip. So I know you don't actually see the zip and you shouldn't actually see the bias binding, but if you do catch a glimpse, or you're just going to see a red band around the inside, which I think with denim works really well. So let's start, whoops, oh dear, dropped it. Let's start at a seam so that my seams meet of the bias binding and of the skirt. And if you haven't used bias binding before, this is already a pre-bought bias binding. It does say in the book that it doesn't have to actually be cut on the bias. You could just use a strip of fabric. So fold over the edge, and then this is going to lay straight on top of the seam. And pin if you wish. I shan't pin all the way around like this. And then sew the raw edges together. So the raw edge of the bias binding and the raw edge of the skirt along that crease line. There we go. Just got a loose connection in my sewing machine foot. Right, now we're away. So I'm just lining up those two edges together and sewing. Now when I come back to the beginning, so where my first fold of the bias tape was, the second side is going to overlap, and I'll need to make sure that that crease mark meets up with the stitch line here. So that I get a nice neat edge when I turn my tape over. It's not, you know, the end of the world or something like this, because it's on the inside of your skirt, so you're not going to see it anyway, but it is nice to have that professional finish. Okay, then we turn over the bias binding and turn over the hem. Don't have this so that the seam actually sits right on the edge, just in case you're going to see any of the bias binding. Leave a little bit of a border around here. Might be easier to iron this before you actually start sewing. So I'm going to pin that all the way around and then sew just along the edge of that bias binding. Right, so that's my skirt all finished and pressed. So the hem from the outside looks like that, and from the inside is where you just get that flash of red from the bias binding. And we're all done.